Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go over Chapter 3, Nature, Nurture, and Human Diversity, and there's going to be 2 parts to this. I'm only allowed to do 15 minutes on these slides. So remember, when we look at nature and nurture, we're looking at the big debate in psychology. So nature is your DNA, and nurture is your environment. So remember, you're 50% dad, 50% mom, and that's the DNA, the heritability, the genes that they pass down to you. And nurture would be like your school, the music you listen to. Those are things that are nurture because they're dealing with your environment. Behavior geneticists, this is what they look at. They look at the effect of nature and nurture on our bodies. You know, how much of who you are is because of your genes, because of the heritability factor, or how much of who you are is based on your environment, the things that surround you that caused you to develop as you did. So when you look at this part right here, this is really what you guys have been studying all your life in biology. So chromosomes contain DNA, and DNA is the genetic code that makes us us. So when we looked at the Human Genome Project, and the Human Genome Project is like a recipe of how to make a person. And so DNA consists of our genes, and what these genes do is they make proteins to determine our development. So here's what the little chromosomes look like. They're those little X's, okay? And here's what the DNA strand actually looks like when it's together. So the genome, think about the Human Genome Project. It's just the instruction book on how to make a person, an organism. And one of the most important things that we study in psychology is twins. And one of the big things that we like to study in psychology is identical twins. There is a difference between identical and fraternal twins. Identical twins mean that they are the same DNA. They're carbon copies of one another. Fraternal twins are brothers and sisters. That means that they share about as many similarities as you would to an older sibling or to a younger sibling. So identical twins, same sex only. For fraternal twins, they can be a one boy, one girl, both boys, both girls. It could be same or opposite sex. So twins, what you look at with twins with our behavior geneticists is they like to look at identical twins and fraternal twins. Identical twins share the same environment but the same genes. So same nurture, same nature. For fraternal twins, they share the same environment, nurture, but not the same actual nature part, the DNA. But they do have 50-50 because they are from the same mom and the same dad. Now, when we've looked at twins who have been separated from birth, what's going on with them is that it was probably a long time ago during the adoption years that they were actually separated. And so when you look at that, they have a lot of similarities, though, still, even when they've been separated. They have the same kind of personality. Normally, they score about the same on intelligence tests. Abilities, attitudes, interests, fears, brain waves, heart rate, all this stuff is about the same, or it's too close. Now, you've got critics of this. The critics will say that you can find as many similarities between two strangers as you can between the twins. So whenever you are looking at anything in psychology, make sure that you can look at it from another viewpoint, from a critical viewpoint, to see what might be wrong. So now we're going to look at adoption studies. And adoption studies, what they do is they try and look at kids who have been adopted, and what they're wanting to do is look at the effect biological parents actually have versus your environment, your nurture. So when we've looked at children who have been adopted, the adopted kids are more like their biological parents than they are of their adoptive parents. So it seems that nature, the DNA part, wins here, and it normally wins like in temperament and any of the medical factors. So adoption studies, as opposed to twin studies, suggest that adoptees who may be biologically unrelated tend to be different from their adoptive parents and siblings. So adoptive studies strongly point to the simple fact that biologically related children turn out to be different in a family. So what we look at is, do siblings have different experiences? Look at you and your brother or your sister. Do you guys have a different experience in school? Do siblings, despite sharing half of their genes, have different combinations of the other half of the genes? Some might be tall, some might be short, some might have a different hair color, different eye color. Maybe those differences in the genes make us distinct. And the ultimate question that we have, does parenting have any effect? Now we're going to focus more on that in Chapter 4, Developmental Psychology. But of course parenting has some effect, but how much effect does it actually have on a person? So parenting, and we'll look at more at like parenting style in Chapter 4. So parenting does have an effect on biologically related and unrelated children. So we look at attitudes, values, manners, beliefs, faith, politics. All these things are going to be directed by your parents in a lot of ways. Kids share a lot of similarities with their parents on manners, beliefs, particularly the faith, the religion, and even politics. And remember, in your teenage years, you guys are crazy, you're rebellious, so you don't want to be like your parents, so you're trying not to be like your parents, and you might rebel against it. But that's okay, because we look at that with Erikson's psychosocial development in Chapter 4. But parenting does seem to have an effect on biologically related and unrelated children. Temperament studies. When we've looked at temperament studies over the years, what we notice is that temperament is talking about how emotionally stable, how reactive your personality is. And identical twins express similar temperaments, which means that there's some sort of heredity in our temperament. So you have an easy temper or you have a difficult, hard temper. So an easy person, easygoing, and it normally means that their parents were probably easygoing people too. At least the heritability factor there suggests that. The difficult child normally had a parent or parents that were difficult temperaments. So heritability, it refers to the extent to which the differences among people are attributable to their genes. We have group differences, so what can we look at here? When you look at group differences, what you look at here is like height, weight. These things can be inherited. Like you can actually get these things, like I'm 4'11", but every female in my family is 4'11". But then we have nutritional influences that make some differences too. For instance, here in the West, the United States, people are heavier and they are taller than their ancestors were a century ago. So human traits are fixed. And when we look at fixed things, we're looking at like 2 eyes, a nose, 2 ears. These things are fixed. But some things change with environment. So however, most psychological traits are liable to change with environmental experience. This is why you guys act different in a classroom versus a hallway. In the hallway, you're loud, obnoxious, but in the classroom with me, you're the sweetest things possible. So genes provide choices for the organism to change its form or traits when environment variables changes. Therefore, genes are pliable or self-regulating. So genes can influence traits which affect responses, and environment can affect gene activity. So we look at genetic predispositions. So sometimes kids are like hyperactive and they're restless, but it could be because there's a gene, an environment, a DNA kind of thing for it, and then the environment interacting with that. So stressful environment can trigger genes to manufacture neurotransmitters, leading to depression. So we look at Mr. Bean versus Orlando Bloom. Obviously there's a difference between these two. Mr. Bean is going to be a comedy actor, and Mr. Bloom over there is going to be more of the pirate swashbuckling kind of films. So molecular genetics is just a branch extension of behavior genetics that asks the question, do genes influence behavior? So this is all they study, is do your genes actually influence your behavior? So does your DNA influence your behavior? When you're looking at molecular genetics, it does pose an ethical question. If you can start actually being able to predict genes and how they are going to affect your personality, or how they're going to affect something for a child, you know, it brings up ethical concerns like aborting fetuses that might have a disorder. Now, really, medical doctors still are looking at this, like when you get pregnant or when you're going to have a baby, they do test the baby for certain genetic disorders. And there's certain genetic disorders only some people might be more likely to have, and it's just based on, certain factors, certain genetic factors, and so might be able to give you that option of having the abortion. But this is where molecular genetics and psychology, we get that ethical question with psychology. Is psychology ethical? So when we look at understanding human nature, we're going to look at evolutionary psychology. In evolutionary psychology, they study why we as humans are alike, because we have a lot of similarities. So they are going to work like in a backward kind of theory. So they look at natural selection. When you look at natural selection, I know you guys looked at Charles Darwin before. So whatever traits were the best at keeping us alive, those are the traits that have been passed down through reproduction. And so when you look at like artificial selection, so what has happened here is they took the tamest of wild foxes and started breeding those tame ones until the tame ones were really, really sweet. And you kept breeding them and breeding them and breeding them over time. And then you got these real cuddly, cute little foxes that the researcher Toot is having in her hand right there. But please understand, this is how dogs developed from wolves. Fluffy was really a wild wolf, and what our ancestors did a long time ago is they took the tamest of the wolves, breeded them together, and then out of that litter they took the two tamest wolves and they kept breeding them like that until you get your Shih Tzu. So human traits, a number of human traits have been identified as a result of pressures afforded by natural selection. Like the reason why babies may be scared of strangers is they become scared of stranger danger when they're mobile, when they can move about. So why are most parents so passionately devoted to their children? Well, look at this versus men and women. Remember, women only have so many eggs that can be fertilized over time, so they conserve their eggs, and men are not so much on the conservation point. Men are more about spreading their seed, because there's a lower cost involved, and we're going to look at that when we look at attraction. So why do people fear spiders and snakes and not things that we invented like electricity and guns? So these are human traits. On human sexuality, just know that there's a difference between the way men and women think, and it's normally due to our reproductive behaviors. There's less risk involved for a male for casual sex versus a female, so we think differently about these two things. Men, it's okay. For females, it's not okay, but remember, females are going to bear the blunt of whatever reproductive behaviors it results in, the consequences of it, because they're the ones that are going to have the babies. They're the ones that's going to have the baby for 9 months and then for 18 years or however long. So mating preferences, typically when we look at here, women are going to select a mature and caring male because there's a higher cost involved in her pregnancy and nursing. She needs a male to take care of and protect her. And males are going to look for healthy, youthful looking females. The evolutionary perspective, critics do look at it. One of the big things is that they say is that it kind of has a backward explanation in terms of natural selection. Is like you're looking at the traits that we have now and you're just working backwards. So it's like you have the answer to the math problem. Now you just got to figure out the steps to how you got the math answer. So evolutionary psychologists, they propose genetic determinism and undercut morality and establish in society. Where genders are unequal, gender preferences are wide, but when they are closely equal, preferences narrow down. So evolutionary psychologists, of course, have responses to that. Some of their biggest responses would be like, we need to test behaviors that expound evolutionary principles. It reminds us of how we've adapted, and it doesn't say necessarily how we ought to be. And males and females have more things that are alike than different. So parents and peers, parents and early experiences. So when we look at parents and we look at their children, we look at development being very important. How they experience the environment, how they experience family, community, culture. So everything really starts with the prenatal environment. So identical twins who share the same placenta are more alike than those who don't. So when we look at the same placenta, they're roommates. They're in the same house. This one, not. So 33% of identical twins and then 66% of identical twins. This is how they actually are. Most identical twins actually share the same placenta, less for the ones who do not. And when we look at brain development and rats, what we notice is that children and people who are in an enriched environment develop a stronger, more reliable brain, like their brain structure is better.